Well, hello everybody, and all of our new friends. So a couple of quick announcements before we dive in. One, for all of you that are new that we just gave books to, we're really pleased to sign those for you as well. So after today's class or after one of the classes over the next 5 weeks, we're happy to sign those for you. Those are worth big money once they have a signature.
Your first editions.
Yeah.
Oh, it's hardbound.
Did they give me that?
That's what I did, I know.
Yeah, we don't get
I get the cheap one. Yeah.
The second announcement is something we didn't talk about last week that I wanted to bring up this week, is that we are hopeful on the 6th week, the last week, it all depends on his schedule, but we are hopeful that we will all be in maybe the theater room and have Mark Victor Hansen himself, the creator of Chicken Soup for the Soul, for those that weren't with us last week, zoom in, and you guys will be able to talk to him and ask him questions, and he's gonna talk your ears off. I promise you that. But we're waiting to find out what his schedule is going to be like. But we're hopeful to do that. If not, I do know that one of our another author of the book will probably suggest you read next, because it's a great Christmas book, and we're getting into that season. Randall Kenneth Jones is another author, and he said if Mark can't make it, he might even come in person. Yeah, he used to live down in Florida. They just moved to Columbia, Missouri. Mm-hmm. So he might even just drive in and meet with all of you and tell you about his book, and you can ask him questions and stuff too. So we'll figure out what the 6th week looks like, but those are our 2 options right now. All right. So for those.
Oh, cell phones. Oh, yeah. Can we make sure the cell phones are off?
Oh, the teachers.
Yeah.
They went off like a lot last week.
Yes, you guys are very busy. I was a little jealous. My phone didn't ring once. What?
You don't live at Mason Pointe?
I kind of want to after experiencing the last couple weeks.
Yeah, no kidding. That's what we talked about on the way home. We're like, man, we could have just stayed at the bar for happy hour and then moseyed over for dinner. I mean, this is fantastic. So for those that are just joining us this week, we're going to give you just a quick recap of what we went over last week. So it's all right here under the first tab, so you can kind of read through it if you would like. But what we're doing is the purpose of this is to help you learn how to write the events of your life and turn them into stories. Okay, so at the end of 6 weeks, you're not going to have your book written. This is something that's ongoing for months, years, however long you want to do it. But we're going to teach you how to take an event in your life and how to illustrate the characters in that event, the settings in that event, and write about it. And at the end of 6 weeks, you'll have the framework and know how to write each story. Then as you just go throughout filling up your journal or however you want to write it, when you get all done and you've written about all the events in your life, believe it or not, you'll have a book. And it'll be like in chapter form, and you can do whatever you would like with it. You can hand it down to your kids, get it published. It's completely up to you. So last week we covered what characters and settings were all about. So the homework for last week was to write down some characters that are in your life, the people that have been influential, and some different settings in your life. And we gave examples of what we mean by settings, and then underneath that, characters and the settings, so under each person, just write brief descriptions about them, like they were crazy, constantly getting me in trouble, right? Or kindest person I've ever known. Just give little details about them, and the same with settings. You know, the house you grew up in might be a setting of one of your stories. What are some things you remember about that? And the tip we gave you was to leave room, because you're going to think of other things as you're doing this and want to come back to and add to those settings and those characters. The other homework we had was to read chapters 1 through 3. And something else that we're doing, I skipped over this, is what we're doing is we're using our book that Stacie and I wrote as a book club to show you what we mean by when we say characters and settings. So this week, we're going to start off talking about, so tab number 2 in the book here, we're going to start talking about the characters and settings within Maestro. So this is our favorite part because we get to hear what your thoughts are on the book that we wrote and the characters in that book. So with that, is there anybody that would like to start? What did you think of chapters 1 through 3?
Did we do our homework? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, and for those that are just joining us, my wife used to be a teacher, language arts teacher. So that's why she likes to have homework. And she wants to make sure that you have your homework and that we start on time and end on time. So.
Yeah, I was just joking. So, so we kind of, what we did was we kind of broke up, obviously if you've read chapters 1 through 3, you understand that that was a lot of the characters in the setting. That's usually what happens in the first part of a book or the first part of a movie. You want to know where it is and who takes place. So what Rick and I did was we kind of came up with some questions and that kind of explained why we wrote the characters the way that we did. And then we kind of wanted to hear, we've been talking for a day, we kind of wanted to learn about you guys. So one of the first things that we came up with was which characters did you connect with in social situations? Obviously in chapters 1 through 3 you learned that Goddard entered Savannah Valley, entered it very quietly, very submissive. He kind of just wanted to be left alone in his room. So that's one way, and that person obviously is my husband in social situations. He is not somebody to say yes to go anywhere, first of all. And then when you do, you don't necessarily want to be there.
I'm not the life of the party.
No, you're not the life of the party.
Nope.
So our question was, are you more like a Goddard in a social situation, or are you more like the welcoming committee, which kind of reflects who I am in social situations? I'll talk to anybody. I don't care.
I'm the welcoming.
You're the welcoming committee, Lou? I kind of figured that. Yeah, I'll talk to anybody. I sit at my daughter's swim meets, and I just look around, and if someone makes eye contact with me, I'm like, so how old's your kid? You know, I'll just talk to whomever, because I want to know more about people. So we are vastly different in social situations, and so our curiosity, what are you guys like in social situations? Well, we know how Lou is.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Well, I love people, and I like to know, meet people and find out their history.
Mm-hmm.
But when I read the first part of the book, I kind of visualized who these people were
Uh-huh.
and how they fit into Mason Pointe.
Do you think they would have fit in well?
I think they would have fit in well. I think they might not have understood our lifestyle because their lifestyle was much more high elevated
Okay.
than our lifestyle, but we still have a lot of the same characteristics. You know, we have the people that are always out there in front saying, hi, how are you? Good to see you. That sort of thing.
Uh-huh. That's good. Yeah, it does.
I think we have the welcoming committee.
You have the welcoming committee. Are you in charge of that?
No.
No? Oh, okay.
Not at all.
Good. Well, that's important in any situation, especially when you walk in, because obviously you learned that the retirement that Goddard is experiencing is not the retirement that he had thought, right? He thought he would be entering retirement with his spouse, and unfortunately that did not happen. So he's there alone. He just wants to be left alone. Obviously, you learned he was a maestro, and so he was always on stage, he was always performing, he was always having to be, quote unquote, on. And so now he just wants to be left alone drinking his brandy in his room. Kind of similar to my husband when he retired from the AT&T. He just wanted to be left at home and drink scotch, not bourbon, and do puzzles, right? That was your big thing when you wanted to be left alone.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, the character Goddard, what chapters 1 through 3 reflects is it was, as I shared with you last week, when I was forced to sell this company I'd spent my entire life building, and essentially was forced into this retirement situation, and I was lost and confused. I didn't know what was next for me. I withdrew, obviously, and I told you a little bit about I was in a very depressive state. I just wanted to be left alone to sip on my nice scotch and build a puzzle and just, because for me, I had control of this situation, right? I mean, it was challenging, it was a puzzle, but I was in control. So yeah, if the opening of Goddard, or the opening of Maestro, is my struggles in an environment that I did not find myself in. This is not what I had planned. I had planned on owning that business and actually passing that business off to my children or the team that I put in place. The retirement that I was, this phase of my life was not what I had planned. So, as in Goddard, it was not what he had planned. He was in a little bit of a state of shock and just wanted to be left alone. But just like in real life, I had a great network of people that wouldn't allow me to just go down this path of depression. And they just kind of forced their way into my life and just were like, you have more to do. God's not done with you yet. And so my wife, being one of them, is obviously one of the three welcoming committee, and Maureen is her character in the book. But so that's how we took a story of our life and made it into this fiction format. So
Yeah, and as you can see, Goddard, in that first couple, you can see him like reserved, but he's not angry, right? Like that was kind of something we definitely wanted to portray, was even though you're put in a certain situation, even though you're uncomfortable, you don't need to be angry about it. He was very gracious. He agreed to go to dinner with them. He, started to open up a little bit to his comfort level, but he wasn't bitter about it. So that was kind of, we talked about last week about some takeaways that we want people to get through your story. One of them is, even if your story is not your situation is not what you had envisioned, the takeaway is to at least maybe open up to a different idea, open up to a different concept, open up to the feelings or the people around you that we feel God puts into your life for certain reasons.
yeah, even though I withdrew, I was not mean to my family. I was not neglective to my family. I was very much there and appreciated them. I was not angry. It was, I was angry at the corporation of AT&T, but I was not angry at any individuals. I wasn't even really angry with myself. So it's the what we hope that people reading from this story get is that, yeah, like Stacie said, you can be, life doesn't always work out the way you plan it, but you don't need to be angry with yourself or others. Still be gracious to everybody around you, as Goddard was to the welcoming committee. And what we really hope, and as you read on, you'll see, is being gracious in a time of struggle will actually help you get out of that struggle 10 times faster than being angry when you're in that struggle. So obviously, if Goddard would have been angry and shut the door on the welcoming committee, on these three ladies that were trying to welcome him, it would have been a very short book. And not very inspirational.
So something else, Lou made a good point, and that was kind of one of the things that we are interested in is, what are your thoughts on the retirement community of Savannah Valley? We don't live in a retirement community, you guys do. Like, is that similar? Like, are there activities, are there dinner, like you can go to dinner with certain people every night? Are there people that sit alone? Like, what are the similarities and differences that you guys experience on a daily basis that we kind of tried to do our best with the Mark Victor Hansen Library to portray in this book? So, anything you'd like to share?
We don't get caviar.
You don't get caviar? Okay, noted.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a little, like Lou said, was this Savannah Valley is a little bit higher
Okay.
lifestyle than what we would have here. Not that we're complaining here, it's just not
Yeah.
like that.
Like that. Okay, good.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on Savannah Valley? Sounds
Definitely more
amazing.
upscale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is nice.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course, this is amazing.
Oh, yeah, Rick and I said we wanted to stay for drinks and dinner, so.
Oh, please
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's fiction, so it's fun. So it was Mark Victor Hansen and his team that said, okay, we're going to create Savannah Valley to be one of the most elite retirement communities in the world. And there's a few reasons for that. One, because what he wanted to portray by this for all of us average readers is that it doesn't really matter how much money you have in life. The problems are all the same. And so each book in the series is dealing with some issue that we all have to deal with in life. It just doesn't matter how much money. It's just fun to have the money in the background in the stories. And the other reason is because obviously when Mark Victor Hansen dreamt this up, he's kind of trying to prep it for a Hallmark or Netflix series. So we're still hopeful that Hallmark will see these 6 books and they're keeping an eye on things because they need more than just 6 stories, obviously. But we're hopeful that a Hallmark or a Netflix or an Amazon or somebody out there will want to make Savannah Valley a mini movie series. So that's another reason why he made it so amazing and upscale.
So I have a question, because I think I've missed the whole point, okay? So I thought we were supposed to be writing our memoirs for our children or grandchildren.
Yes.
And so that to me means telling them where you're from, what your family was like, what you've done
Yes.
through the years, but not focus on the retirement community.
Yes.
It sounds like you're focusing on the retirement community.
Yes, so that you're 100% right. What as we illustrated last week, you can start anywhere you want with your stories. You
Yeah.
don't have to start at the very beginning, like
Yeah.
I was born here or there. That's of course one of them. What we did with our book is we started in retirement and working backwards. So we're just using our book to kind of help illustrate how you write your story. So for instance, the way we wrote our retirement, which isn't completely here yet, is through Maestro. So yes, you're absolutely right. And then this is the book club part of it. So this is just coming together and talking about chapters 1 through 3 and what we thought of it. And we'd love questions like, why did Goddard do this? Or why is Maureen so pushy? You know, and I can tell you she is. You know, so it's still about reading the book as a group and talking about it and exploring it. And then after we get done talking about it, we're going to jump into what the next section is going to be. But so what we did is we talked about characters and settings, and then what we did is we have you read what characters and settings look like. So Goddard and all the people we introduced into the book. Savannah Valley is where the setting is. And as you read the book, what we were hoping is you would see the amount of detail about each character that helps you visualize, right? I mean, you mentioned that, like you were picturing these people. So when you're writing your story about the people in your life, we want you to be that detailed so that your kids, when they're reading it, are picturing that person, like they got a visual of what that person looks like. Does that make more sense?
Well, I agree with you about that.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, this is just like the book club part, and then after we finish this, we'll move on to the writing part, which I'm excited. That seems like that's the more exciting
Yeah.
part. I mean, that's awesome. And then we just kind of had a fun question thrown out there. What is the craziest drink or meal you've ever had? Obviously, in that book, they went to the restaurant and had that Bloody Mary drink that was full of everything, and that kind of stemmed from my husband owned a restaurant many years ago in the Delmar Loop, and they were known for, they had like the best Bloody Marys in St. Louis.
The best Bloody Mary bar.
And so that's how we kind of tied that in to our fiction book, was doing that. So we just were curious, like, what's the craziest cocktail drink you've had either here or somewhere
Yeah.
else? Yeah,
Wow, that's a hard one.
that's a hard one. I can tell you we were just in Scottsdale, and I still talk about it.
Hurricane.
A hurricane? That's a good one. I had a really good spicy margarita. I don't know if anyone likes a spicy margarita, but I gotta figure out how they made that, because I need to make it here.
Well, mine was in New Orleans, and it's the Bloody Mary. But what I was so impressed with in the Bloody Mary, they included a whole slice of bacon.
You used to do that?
And that really, I think that was the top one for me.
Nice.
Yep, yeah, we used to have, at the restaurant, we would do these thick cut slab bacon
Yeah.
and maple glaze and put that in there, and it's something to go, just nice to snack on while you're drinking your Bloody Mary.
Yeah. Maybe you need to ask, maybe the bar here can create a Bloody Mary
Yeah.
with bacon in it, put in that request.
I like it.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, that was just kind of chapters 1 through 3. Nothing really exciting happened in Maestro
Well,
yet.
Well, I mean, so was there any questions about the characters or why they did what they did or what they said or anything about the book?
Well, one thing that I noticed in the first few, well, the whole book, is they were always very polite and very positive in their answers to one another.
Mhm.
So I think if you're doing your own book, you know, you have to reflect of what was our household situation. Were we always polite? Or were we yelling and screaming? Or were we, you know, what were we doing?
Yep.
So, but I thought
Great.
the book, Goddard always had the right answer,
Yes, he does.
which was kind of intriguing.
Unfortunately, that is true.
I wish I had somebody like that.
So you are Goddard?
I am Goddard, yeah.
Oh, I didn't get that one.
I am Goddard in the book, yeah.
Okay, got it.
So after a week and kind of reflecting on last week and kind of thinking about if you choose to write your story in any sort of format, do you pretty much have an idea if you want to write it in fiction or nonfiction? You already know?
I already know, yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't want to give my kids fiction.
Okay, you want to give them
Yeah.
nonfiction. Good,
Yes.
good. Has most people kind of decided on the nonfiction route, or?
I'm having trouble deciding, with 82 years, what story or what there have been so many significant things
Mhm.
and so many different changes, et cetera, et cetera. I can't focus on what part or what story I'd like to write.
Okay,
That's great. So that's why we suggest just starting with a few. Just write down like maybe 5 different stories you'll want to tell. So pretty much, so if you follow, when we talked about your why, what you're writing down, like why you want to write your stories and who you're writing them for, if you think about that, so let's say it's your kids, right? Let's say that you're doing this for your kids. A great place to start is what is it that you want to make sure your kids know about you? Like, it's some helpful information that times are going to be tough, right? There's just no easy path in life. So I know that when we write ours, I want my kids to understand that we struggled, okay? The success that they might have seen us have late in life is not the success we've always had in life. Life is a struggle, and kids these days don't understand that. And they think it all comes too easy. So we want to make sure that the story we told first was of a story of struggle. Now we did it in fiction, but we also will do it, in nonfiction. Try not to, and this is where people get stuck, is they get too overwhelmed, like there's just so much that I want to talk about. Pick one event in your life, or I would say 5, and write those 5 events down and just focus on them, telling those stories, those 5 stories. As you're telling those stories are going to trigger thoughts of other things in your life. So go to a different page and write that at the top, because that one you're going to want to come back and talk about too. So that's the biggest thing is just try to find out, like, okay, I want to tell my kids that this. And then think about the stories that have happened in your life that taught you that. And then just start with that one story. Just right at the top of it, right at the very top. For me, and the examples I give in here, let's see. So, and we're going to get into this week. But the event is the day I learned I could lose everything I've ever worked for. So when I was writing my personal memoirs, that's what I wrote. I wrote that at the top of the page. And that is what this story is going to be all about, is the day that I learned I could lose everything. And I really want my kids to understand that that was a real thing. That even though they didn't know we were about to lose everything, because I would never have let them know that that's what I was dealing with. And when they read this, they're going to be like, I had no idea that we could have lost everything at that time. And so we're gonna, I promise you, by the end of the 6 weeks, you'll know exactly, or we hope, you're gonna know exactly what to do and where to get started. So that's why last week, we just wanted you to write down some people and places, that's it, that are influential to you. And this week, we're gonna start learning more about rising action and writing about the events in our lives. Does that help?
A little bit.
A little bit.
We'll see at the end of today if it helps.
So are you saying that our main goal here is to let our children and grandchildren know what were the significant things that happened in our lives and how we approached them and how we acted at that point and what we learned from them?
That's
Is that what you're saying?
That's what I think that would be
Yeah.
most beneficial to them. Yeah.
I just want to be sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they're gonna when they're reading this, that's gonna be more shocking to them than.
Oh, yeah.
Than the day you met your husband,
Right.
and they're like, well, you told us that story 15 times, right? But what I think is really is what they can take away from. And so we got a gentleman that did this, and his son, who's a friend of ours, goes back and looks at that book. Like when he's struggling, he goes to either the Bible or his dad's book.
Yeah.
And he just starts reading through his dad's book to go, okay, Dad was here. Dad's done this. I can do this, as a dad or whatever. So yeah, we're not saying that's what you have to do, but we are saying that that's probably what they're going to appreciate the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great question.
Any other questions so far? No? Those are good ones.
Okay. All right, so did we come up with some characters that have been in our lives and some different settings in our lives?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah? All right, good. So this week, what we're going to talk about is what's called rising action. And I'll let Stacie talk about this because this is her world. She's the language arts major. But you can tell them about rising action.
So what rising action is, so you have your characters and you have your setting, right? So what rising action is essentially it's the introduction to the powerful point in your story. So what Rick wrote down, what he wrote was, what did you write? The day I learned I could lose everything I worked for. That's the powerful point of your story. That's where he is starting. So what he needed to do at that point, what you need to do at that point is once you have that powerful point, kind of go a couple steps backwards. What led to that? What led to that thing that you want your story to be about? Was it AT&T changing their way that they paid their retailers? Thank you. Was it that? Was it a move? Was it a forced move? Was it were you laid off from a job? Did you, like for me, in my story, it was all of a sudden, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer and told me she had 6 weeks to live. That was my big point. So what happened before that? So you want to take your big thing and start to write a few things that led up to that. And I can promise you that's probably, out of everything you write, just from experience, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle because we always remember those big events, right? Like you can remember exactly what happened at that moment you thought you were gonna lose everything. I remember exactly where I was when my mom called me and told me, my mom and dad called and told me that. But what was life like before that? What was life like a week before that? What was life like a month before that? What was it like a year before? That's gonna be really, it's gonna take some time to start to think about that because we tend to forget those things because they're not very important to you, right? So that's kind of what rising action is, and it'll start to flow once you get that part. In chapters 4 and 5, what we'll start to look at is through the rising action, and in the book Maestro, what you're going to do is in chapters 4 and 5, you will start to see Goddard's desires to be left alone start to fade, okay? So he's going to kind of, quote unquote, you know how you watch movies or read books and you hear backstory? You kind of hear where characters came from. That's what you're going to start to learn about Goddard. So that's exactly what I want you to do in your stories, is where did you come from to get to where you are now? Okay, any questions with that? No? Rising action doesn't have to be many events. It could be just a couple, because those, once you start to think about them, the details are going to start to come out quicker than you think. Now, even talking about it, I can think of things that life was like before my mom was diagnosed with cancer. Like I think of cancer as like that part of my life that it's like either before cancer or after cancer. And I typically today think about after cancer. That's usually what we talk about. But now once I start talking about it, once I start thinking about it, I can think of the things before cancer. Yeah, and that's the kind of things that I want you guys to focus on. Any questions with that when you think about what your big part of your story is? Anything that is concerning or anything you want to discuss about the things prior to that? Because if you look at, I'm going to draw it on here. Don't get that because I know you. Okay. I don't remember if you remember in elementary school, but do you remember these? Like when you would write a story, you were a kindergarten teacher, weren't you? Yes. You were my friend's kindergarten teacher. I forgot that. Do you remember? Does this kind of look familiar? Do you remember learning this? Okay. So this right here is your big point, right? The top of your pyramid is your big point, your big storyline. Everything that leads up to it is going to be on almost a ladder, a sequence of events leading up to that. So that's what your rising action essentially is what's called your sequence of events that lead up to that. Mine, for example, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. Good events and bad events can be part of this. Bad event was she never went to the doctor. Okay, unfortunately that's a reality of it. So that's something that I would put in this rising action as something that led up to that. Something else that, positively was she ended up not feeling so great, so we ended up forcing her to go to the doctor. So little pieces of events will lead up to that big moment that you're talking about as the focal point of your story.
And again, all these points that you're going to make are, so for instance, using this exact same example, when she will eventually write this story, she wants to bake in those small details of my mother would never go to the doctor. So she's letting her grandkids know, go see the doctor. Make sure you pay attention. My mother would just never, and she'll go into great detail into this action that's leading up to the fact that she was diagnosed with cancer. And then some of the other things that'll be rising actions in her stories is the rough, turbulent relationship she had with her mom leading up to when she found out that she was diagnosed with cancer. Because then as she starts talking about the after effects, it's the relationship that they developed. Because luckily her mother, it didn't pass in 6 weeks, 3 years. Mm-hmm. Through medicine, we got 3 years with her, and their relationship was incredible after those 3 years. And what's a beautiful thing about this story is the other thing she's going to tell about the story is don't get hung up on all the little things in life. she only got 3 years of a great relationship with her mom when she could have had 30 great years, right? So that's what we're going to try to help you to write when writing your stories, is to make sure to pay attention to those details. That's why we want you to follow this process and think really hard as you're doing this and jotting down notes, because it's pretty easy just to write in one chapter of her book, oh, and in, what year was it?
2017.
So in 2017, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. I was only told 6 weeks, but we got 3 years with her. Exactly.
Yeah, right?
The kids are like, okay, we kind of knew that. Maybe the grandkids are like, oh, that's sad. But there's really nothing in there that they can take away from it, because what we're hopeful that your stories will do and ours will do someday is a great-grandchild is something's gonna happen in their life with cancer, right? And they can look back on this book and go, I'm not gonna let a minute go by, you know, and I'm gonna make amends, or I'm gonna do whatever. So we want your stories to be powerful learning experiences as you tell them. So that's why this illustration here about the ladders is just keep jotting down the details, because they're gonna be very important.
And something we like to talk about with the details as well, and Rick will kind of talk about this, is all this is in the past, right? So future generations are going to be reading this. So things that were important in that time period, they're not going to know, right? Like, I mean, even though it's 2017, like if it was a while ago, there would be no cell phone that would have called me to tell my mom, tell me that my mom, if it was a long time ago. So you want to make sure that you have those kind of details about what life was like, what world events were going on, what was a daily, occurrence. Like you had to wait for the phone to ring at the house, like people 20 years from now are gonna be like, what do you mean there's a house phone? Like they're gonna get so confused, right? Or if we say like, today we said something, oh, they texted us. 20 years from now, there may not be text messages. We don't know. So make sure that you kind of use those details, because I can promise you, when my grandparents, when they were, still alive, would tell me those kind of stories about the details. I remember going to their house and having the rotary phones, right? And my daughter, who's 10, will never probably see something like that. So a detail explaining that rotary or caller ID or, things like that. Having that busy signal on a phone, those type of things, future generations are just going to eat. What?
Nonetheless, a party call or
Yeah.
a party line.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Party
Yeah.
line.
All of those fun things that are going to be lost because we aren't writing about them. These future generations are going to find absolutely fascinating. I mean, I love learning about history. My husband loves learning about history. Future generations are going to love to learn about your history and what was going, not the history in the history books, but the history of what your life was like during the time that your story was written. So think about those teeny details of a rotary phone, or, just, I don't even know, like I remember, we've talked about, you have in here, you only came in when the street lights came on, right? Like you were playing outside. There was no other way to get a hold. My parents never knew where I was on a daily basis. I just knew when the street lights came on, it was dinner time. If you weren't home by dinner, you were in big trouble, right? I mean, that's how it was. What?
You didn't get dinner.
You didn't get dinner. Right now, my daughter's got this watch, and I can track where she is, and it's so different now. So make sure that you keep those details in your story, because your kids, grandkids, whomever you're writing for, are gonna love to hear what your life was like when you were going through that.
Yeah. So when you're following along in here, obviously I think we all have agreed that we're probably going to do more autobiography and memoirs. So that's the red part of all this. So as Stacie just illustrated, so this is a chance to explain the details that led up to your particular story. It's in the details that the reader will appreciate how you got there. It's also in the details where future readers will get to learn what life was like, technology, surroundings, etc., as we were just talking about during your time, or at least the time of the story. Here's where you get the opportunity to be vulnerable and honest with the details, like what you were struggling with at the time or the events that put you in that situation. So on the next page, I gave an example. So the example is, and again, in the red, I put what my story is about. And we're gonna have page numbers on these in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. that's-
We are, well, you start reading, Mark.
What chapter
are you on?
Yeah, so we should have put page numbers on
Preparation
them.
for week 2.
Yes, very good.
Yes, so we just read. Oh,
Right here. Yep,
okay, we're
top.
no,
So it's
Right.
after week
we're in week 2.
Yep.
Yeah.
We are right there.
Preparation.
I just read this, so we're right here.
Oh, okay.
So just go to number 2, Ted. Yep, right here.
Right there. It's got a red, it says example at the top. Yes,
Yep.
perfect, right there. We're right,
So, right
1,
there.
2, 3, right there. Yep, this is his example of rising action. Yep. Gonna read that out loud.
Yep, so. It was an unusually warm afternoon in late 2016. I had just left my doctor's office after a routine checkup. I was sitting in my car on speakerphone outside of Walgreens when I learned the news that everything was about to change for the worse. I remember my blood running cold and then extremely hot. A pit in my stomach let me know that if what I am hearing is true, everything I had worked for was going to be put in jeopardy. I had spent the past 22 years growing a business that spanned 13 states with 120 locations and with 800 plus or minus employees. And the change coming in 2017 by the parent company could bring it all to an end. The business I had built was a series of retail stores that sold the goods and services of a very large telecommunications company called AT&T. I was the third largest in the country, but was their number one retailer in sales, in several sales KPIs, key point indicators. I had been asked by AT&T leadership to grow my operations nationwide. By doing so, I had left myself and my company vulnerable to things I could not have predicted, but should have. And my story would go on and on from there. But what I want you to take away from this example is just, let's start back at the top. It was an extremely warm afternoon in late 2016. So I could have just said, oh, it was back in 2016, right? But explain that it was unusually warm because we don't know, maybe global warming is gonna be, something to where they're gonna look back and go, wow, see, they knew back in 2016 it was unusually warm. Who knows?
It's always warm in November.
Right, I had just left my doctor's office for a routine checkup. I wanted that in there because that's where I came from, but I also wanted my kids to know that, hey, a routine checkup is not a bad thing. I was sitting on my car on speakerphone outside of Walgreens. Now so I even put in there on speakerphone. I could have said on the phone, but I was on speakerphone because, like Stacie was saying, 20 years from now, is there even a speakerphone or is it going to be holograms, right? I mean, who knows what is out there? And they're going to be like, wow, he was on a speakerphone. And what's a Walgreens? Right? What's a Walgreens? And when I learned the news that everything that was about to change, and then I went into some details about how I personally felt. My blood ran cold and then extremely hot, and there was a pit in my stomach. And then I told them a little bit about the business that I had built, and that everything was about to change. And I used things like AT&T. Who knows if AT&T is here in 20, 30 years? Or it might be the biggest corporation in the world, and they'll be like, wow, he had AT&T stores. So it was just in this little example of how I was getting started with my story, you can see all the details I put in there that normally we would not think of, but they will be important someday. So just think about that whenever you start writing about your story. Don't forget, don't gloss over the little details, put them in there. Because who knows if they'll even exist in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay? Time is it?
2:49, we're doing good.
Doing good, all
We're
right.
doing good.
All
I
right.
know, I need my teacher clock behind there to see, the big one.
So now we have like where do you get started? So for next week's homework.
This is your story, so here's your opportunity to share the good events that blessed you and the bad events that challenged you, And that's something really important. Our family, even not just our kids, but our family knows we sold his business or, we're forced, but they don't know the details behind it. They don't know a lot of the challenging things that it tested us, Rick personally, and just our life. So those are things that we probably will share with them through this book that they would have never known. But we also want the good things that come out of it, right? We don't want this to be a negative, we want this also to be exciting things that happened in your life and what that experience looked like for you personally and the people around you that your kids can enjoy as well. So it's an inspirational as well as challenging you. Future generations need to know both so they can too see the blessings in their own life and understand we all have experienced challenges, like Rick said. Believe it or not, the more vulnerable you are in these sections of your story, the more inspiring they will be to your reader. And they will be more inspiring to yourself. I know Rick has said doing this workshop himself has really he's been more vulnerable about this than he ever was actually going through it. So writing down the things that you experienced years ago makes you have a little bit more appreciation to where you are today. And we've talked about that at home, just saying like, wow, I've told him from the very beginning that I was proud of him through all of this, but I believe he's starting to see how proud he is of himself, of all the things that he went through. And so that's what we want for you guys as well, is when you're going through all this to go, wow, I really accomplished a lot, and I should be proud of myself and be proud of where you are today. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, I'm
You
finished.
done?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. So the tips, so this is what we were talking about. So the tips to get started is begin small. At the top of different pages, write down 5 to 10 key events that you think would be interesting or inspiring to your readers. So for example, it could be my first day of high school. It could be my grandfather's influence on my life. It could be the day I learned the news I could lose everything I've ever worked for, right? So just write down 5 to 10 different things at the tops of different pages. Under the events, write out details that you remember for each story, whether it was raining or cold, I was scared, he was a giant of a man, just details. Writing out details of one story will sometimes spark memories of details in other stories. These details will help you set the tone for the story you eventually will tell. So that's why I was saying that you might be thinking about the details of one story and go, and it'll spark another one, so write that one down. And you can come back to it and write about it later. At the bottom of each page, write down all the reasons why this story is important for all the takeaways you hope the reader gets from this story. So for example, the unknown is usually scarier than the reality. The people that were the most intimidating to us taught us the most about living. Another example, you will face things that you believe are impossible to overcome, etc. This will be important as you start to write out this story to make sure that the points are obvious and noted. So what I did is I did an example on the next page, as we kind of like already took a look at. So this is what it might look like. So the big event was the day I learned I could lose everything that I've ever worked for. Some of the details is it was fall of 2016. It was unusually warm. I was on a conference call on a speakerphone. My blood ran cold then hot. AT&T changed everything. I felt angry, betrayed, and a sense of hopelessness that I had never felt before. I decided not to tell Stacie right away because I needed time to figure things out. Right? These are just all details. I'm not writing a story yet. I'm just writing out details that I want to make sure that this story conveys. And then down at the bottom, I wrote why I think this story, this part of my life was important, is you will face things in life that you believe are impossible to overcome, only to learn that they are all part of your plan. Trust but verify, and always think and plan for the impossible. Planning for the impossible is just as important as dreaming for what is possible. So when I'm done writing about this time in my life, that's what I hope my readers kind of take away from it. My kids, my grandkids, I hope my great-grandkids someday learn that planning for the impossible is just as important as planning for or dreaming of what is possible. So, this is kind of a little bit reversed, but you see how I wrote out my details, my heading, and then my details, and what's that? And then if you go back to the example we read, I just filled in the blanks. So anyway, you kind of see how all the details, then I just filled in the blanks and I was able to write out about that story. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah?
Okay.
You said a lot of really interesting, good things to us today.
Okay, good. Thank you.
We tried.
I promise it'll all make sense at the end of 6 weeks. We're gonna get there.
Yeah.
Yes.
So 4 through 6.
Read chapters 4 through 6.
And you'll see the rising action in Goddard's life. And then we'll talk about that next week.
How did you come up with the name Goddard? Because every time he says it, I go, God. Wait, did you feel like you were God and therefore Goddard worked?
No, Goddard is actually an older name that existed. That it was in a story that my grandfather told me about a gentleman he knew, and it was named Goddard. And I was always like, gosh, that name is such a powerful,
Yeah, it is.
powerful name.
Yeah.
So when it came to naming the character, I thought, why not Goddard? It was just such an amazing name.
Unique name that sticks
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
But
Is
thank
what
you
we
for
wanted.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. And by the way, when we start off talking about the book, those are the kind of questions we want to talk about.